yet. Okay, well, welcome everyone to this webinar, the first NAEEA webinar for 2021, hosted by the Enabling Assessment Special Interest Group. And the topic today is Enabling Student Success, One Assessment at a Time. It is 1 p.m. Brisbane time. I know there might have been some confusion with the daylight savings and things like that across different states, but the Australian Eastern Standard Time generally refers to Queensland time. If you are engaging with us via social media, we encourage you to use NAEEAWS hashtag, and the NAEEA Twitter handle is at 01NAEEA. I'd like to acknowledge, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we meet today. I know that today we have participants from different parts of Australia, as well as many other countries as well. So although we are meeting online, we are still physically on traditional lands. As we continue to work in the first footprints of Aboriginal people, no matter where we are on this land, we recognize the important role the traditional elders have played in education, research, and knowledge creation. Thus, I would like to respectfully acknowledge all elders and officially welcome everyone to this session. James, did you want to do that?
Sure. So throughout today's session, feel free to post questions in the chat whenever you like, and we'll also have some time at the end for answering additional questions. We've got a variety of presenters, as you can see, from across Australia today. So both Pranit and myself will be presenting, but we've also got Mercedes from the University of Wollongong and Ben from the University of Wollongong as well. And we've got both Lisa and Sharon from Edith Cowan University presenting today too. So we're going to cover quite a full range of topics today, I think. So it's an action-packed series of contents, but we're going to talk a bit about the special interest group for enabling. And we're going to talk about the features of enabling assessment and pathways education, why we have enabling assessments and their purpose, how we can start to influence assessments in higher education, and what the barriers are to effective assessment innovations. We'll have case studies from CDU, so Charles Darwin University, University of Wollongong, and Edith Cowan University of good assessment practice. And we'll talk about what's coming next, moving forwards for the future. Pranit.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, James. Well, first of all, I know a number of people who have joined us today are members of the National Association of Enabling Educators of Australia. But if you're not familiar with what NAEEA does, is it represents all the enabling and pathway education in Australia. And these programs are programs that are designed generally to give students a second chance of education. Many of the students in these enabling programs in Australia are from various disadvantaged backgrounds, such as low SES, mature age students, students with disabilities, a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds, refugee and asylum seeker students, students who have English as a second language, and many others. The educators who work in many of these programs are particularly skilled to deal with the various challenges and opportunities, I must add, associated with teaching and supporting students from these diverse backgrounds. We have an enabling assessment special interest group that James and I facilitate. It's still sort of in sort of early stages of getting started, if you like, but it's a small group. And it represents a group of educators who have a special interest in designing assessments for students from these disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, just before I move on, I'd like to share with you a feature that was shared on the campus morning mail that was, I think it was only about 2 or 3 days old. There's a general perception among many university educators that a lot of students who come through the enabling and pathway programs for some reason are a little less qualified than many of the students who come from traditional ATA backgrounds, for example. And Victoria Fielding from University of South Australia wrote a piece in Campus Morning Mail that that's actually not true. And if anything, many of the students who are graduates of enabling programs are quite well prepared, and in many cases probably better prepared than many other students who are coming directly from other pathways as well. So I think that's quite a nice little thing to share. What do we mean by success in higher education? Success, generally speaking, is knowledge plus skills. We generally tend to focus on that. We teach content, we get students to do certain things in a particular way. But I believe that success is knowledge plus skills multiplied by attitude. I just want you to reflect on that about your own personal successes. So attitude plays a very, very important role, but it's not just attitude added to knowledge and skills. It's a factor that multiplies everything that you gain. So we're here to talk about enabling assessments. What do we use assessments for? Assessments are generally, has got a couple of main consequences. There are intended consequences of assessments that motivate students to engage in learning activities, develop awareness about current and expected abilities for students and teachers. It helps us make decisions about progress and graduation, etc. Unfortunately, many of the assessments also have unintended consequences like anxiety, stress, disengagement. Many students drop out of studies because of assessments. It's not uncommon to find students commenting about things like assessments were the hardest part of my studies. And unfortunately, many educators tend to use assessment as gatekeeping tools. Assessments are contextualized within the overall teaching and learning frameworks approaches that is used. So it doesn't sit independently outside of anything else that happens in the classroom. So if at all possible, let's make it enjoyable. Assessments in enabling programs generally focuses on developing students' confidence to undertake challenging tasks. Again, success comes from attitude. More formative assessments that build skills and aptitude for higher education studies. So again, I believe in myself, I can do this. Less but better quality summative assessments, so less stress and anxiety. It's important to induct students into the assessment approaches that you are planning to use. So invest time and energy to get students to understand the expectations. We all need to know what we need to do. And this time is actually well spent. And it should be designed for learning. Now, a little while ago, I sent out a survey amongst all our special interest group members, and I asked them to sort of try and, in just some few quick words, describe what does assessment mean for enabling education. And these were the key words that came through, and I just dumped it into a word cloud, and this is what I got. Apart from really encouraging words, things like personalized, engaging, empathy, help, care, etc., the three key things that jumped out for me was empathy, compassion, and success. And I think that is very, very important when we're designing any kind of teaching and learning programs for any students, regardless of if they are in enabling programs or not. At this point, I'd like to invite James I'll stop my share for now. I'd like to invite James to share some of his experiences, and then after that, we'll move on to Mercedes and then Lisa and Sharon.
All right, thank you, Praneet. I'm just going to open up the chat again, just in case there are any questions that come through. There we go. All right, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about how I support students to achieve success in my unit at Charles Darwin University. So I will just give you a little bit of an overview first before I get into it. So I run the bioscience unit in our enabling program at CDU. It's one of 2 elective units. Our focus is about how science works, learning about the human body and also communication in science. So the majority of our students who do bioscience are going on to study things like nursing and midwifery, for instance. Since 2017, we've been getting about 800 students a year, although last year we had about 1,200 students, which was really stretched us. And about 80% of the students doing bioscience are enrolled externally. Now, so I guess some overarching principles around how the assessment in bioscience is designed. I know Pranit just mentioned about number of assessment tasks, but we have 5 summative tasks. The early ones are low stakes, and that's designed to help build the academic self-efficacy of students, so they get some confidence when they've got to do those bigger, higher stake ones. So the general approach we take is to start off with the formative tasks, which then prepare students for low stake summative tasks, which then prepare students for the final high stakes summative task. We don't have a final exam in bioscience. Indeed, none of our units here at TEP units here at CDU have a final exam, and nor do we have any hurdle assessments. And something that I quite strongly believe in, that it's not just what we teach students that prepares them for their further studies, it's how we teach them, but it's also how we assess them that helps prepare them for their undergraduate studies. So giving them the types of assessments they're going to get in their first year at university. So in bioscience, we have our weekly learning and teaching materials. They have readings to do, which is quite common in science. We have online and face-to-face classes, which help them with understanding the readings, but we also have dedicated classes that assist students with the assessment tasks in the unit. So they teach them assessment skills. So things like how to answer multiple choice questions, how to respond to short answer questions, how to write reports, that sort of thing. And we have a whole lot of formative tasks as well. We're progressively turning these into online interactive formative tasks. And we're doing that using H5P, and we're doing that so we can give students immediate feedback, or students can get immediate feedback to help them to self-assess their knowledge and understanding of the content. Now, I've pulled out the practicals here as well as a separate area, because the practicals are really where the different parts of the units are tied together. We have face-to-face classes for practicals, and we also do some online prac classes for the external students as well. And we also have, as part of the practicals, some formative tasks too, to help the students develop their knowledge and understanding, in this case, of how fair tests in science work. And the learning teaching materials, our formative tasks, the practicals, and indeed the formative tasks in the practicals are all designed to help prepare students for the summative assessment tasks. So we have quizzes. We have 5 multiple choice quizzes throughout the semester. Quizzes are the most common type of assessment task given to students in first year science units at CDU. We also give them 2 attempts at each quiz, and we only count the higher grade they get for one of their attempts towards their final grade in the unit. So unless a student's getting full marks on their first attempt, they always have the opportunity to try and do better to get a higher score. Now, the practicals in particular help prepare students for assignments 1 through 3, which are predominantly short answer type of questions that they have to complete. So the practicals and the learning and teaching materials provide a place for students to practice those types of things that they do in these assignments. Now, as the assignments progress from 1 to 2 to 3, there are fewer questions, but the students have to write more for each question and get more in depth with their responses. these assignments are also designed to mimic the types of things that they have to do in the major assignment at the end of the semester. So we're giving them practice in these assignments to write their report, which is the final and major assignment for the unit. So each of the assessment tasks feeds directly into that major assignment, the report, as well as the practicals, and going back all the way back to our learning and teaching materials, they all feed into that final major assignment. So we are aiming to, from the very first week of classes for bioscience, we are preparing them for writing the report, as well as steps along the way that help develop their skills required for writing the report. Now, in this increasingly complex model here of how the assessment is designed and structured in the bioscience unit, there's one more piece to this puzzle, and that is resubmissions. So a student who fails any of the assignments, including the major assignment, the scientific report, we give them the opportunity to resubmit that assignment, but we cap the maximum mark they can get for that resubmission at 50%. So I've wrestled with this decision about why do I only give them 50%? On the one hand, I want to support them. I want them to be able to get through. And obviously, if they're passing all their assignments, that increases that possibility. But talking to students about why they failed, the common reasons are things like, I didn't do the preparation work beforehand, I didn't go to classes, I rushed, I didn't ask questions beforehand when I knew that I was struggling or there was something I didn't understand. And I think it's important for students to realize that there are consequences when they make those decisions, but I don't want that consequence to be a failure. So I'm kind of giving them only 50% for a resubmission is kind of the compromise position I take between supporting and helping them understand there are consequences for not doing all the preparation work beforehand. So I think that wraps things up for me, Pranit. I'm happy if people want to post some questions in the chat.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, James. I was monitoring the chat and nothing has come up, which is fine. And if you do have any questions, please continue to use the chat for that, and we'll address that along the way. If there's something that stands out, we'll address it using voice, of course. Otherwise, we'll just address it using chat. Now, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end for question and answers as well. From Natasha, I did wonder if you could give an example of the assignment short answer question. So we've got a little bit of time. Did you want to do that, James, or?
Sorry, I was reading the chat messages starting to come through.
That's all right.
Sorry, so what did you, oh, sorry, I missed what you asked.
Oh, sorry, hold on. So from Natasha, wonder if you could give an example of the assignment short answer question.
Okay, right. I was reading that while, yeah, okay. So it varies on the assignment, but the first assignment is very much focused on fair tests in science. So we have a question, for instance, about how can you achieve validity in a fair test? We give them an example of an experiment and say, for instance, can you describe how chance was distinguished from real differences in this experiment and suggest an improvement where they could do it better? Just as one quick example.
Look, we might move on to the next presenters, and then all the presenters will be monitoring the chat and addressing through the chat. And if they're unable to do that, we'll get when we get to the end, we'll try and address that as well. So I'd like to invite Mercedes Hinchcliffe from University of Wollongong, and I notice Ben is also online, so I'm not sure if Ben is coming on board or not, but Mercedes, take it away.
Thanks so much, Praneet. Can everyone hear me okay? It's good. All right, thank you. Yes, my name is Mercedes Hinchcliffe. I've got Ben with me as well. We sort of work in a few different institutions, but so mainly for me, I'm at the University of Wollongong postgraduate program, and I'm also at the University of Wollongong College, where I've been lucky enough to work with Praneet in the past. So I work and what I think it gives me a really unique opportunity, because I see the students starting really in the pathways, and then I'm able to follow a lot of them all the way until they get into their masters. So, and we do have quite a few that will go from enabling programs to masters. So it's really such a great unique view for me to get to see these students. So one of the things that we've noticed in postgrad, undergrad is this whole feedback. You know, and I'm sure a lot of us here who are educators have so many students, and we don't have a lot of time to give this feedback. And sometimes we're really annoyed because we do take a lot of time and then they don't read it at all. So I've been trying to figure out what to do there. And so we'll back up and look a little bit about feedback, and then I'll talk to you through, and Ben will help me out with the results of the study that we did. So we know that students are typically driven by marks. But at the same time, they'll say, but why did I get that? And I'm sure you all have, for those of you who are educators, have had, you know, a student who gets a 95, let's say, and they come back to you and say, they come back to you and say, oh, can I have feedback? Where did I lose 5 marks? And you're like, oh, really? But anyways, most of the time that what we found was when feedback was given simultaneously with grades, they tend to not really look at it. And it's kind of one of 2 reasons why they're not looking at it. One is that they've had a good outcome and they think, I don't need your feedback. I've done just fine. So I don't need to read about what I could do to get better. Or they haven't done as well as they thought they were going to do, and they have this thing of shame. So we know that only a few students will approach us after they get a poor outcome on an assessment to meet us. So I think that so what we've tried to figure out here is, what can we do? One of our biggest dilemmas is all this time that it takes to do feedback. You know, constantly, especially with COVID now, we've been asked and tasked to do so much more, especially when it comes to the administrative side of things. So if feedback at the same time, giving it to the students, doesn't produce better outcomes, what can we do? So this is really some of what we're proposing here. So it's something called 60-second feedback. Sounds good, nice and simple, easy to say, easy to remember. So what we've done is we've given feedback in the beginning of the session, okay? So what we did, and it's very similar to what James was talking about, so it looks almost identical, is that we have 6 short answer questions leading up to a bigger report or final exam. So I know that James said he didn't have a final exam. At the time that we did this study, we still had a final exam. Moving on from COVID, we have gotten rid of the final exam, but it's a very similar task. So those 6 tasks will lead up to the final task. Now, these are weekly short answer questions. And again, if somebody wanted to see an example of that, I could pull one up a little bit later. This is for a marketing class in particular, but this could be any class. We're just talking about the sciences. We see that we do things quite similar. So what would happen is I would give them starting week 3. So week 1 and 2, we're starting to get to know the theory. We're understanding what marketing is because this was a principles class. And then the tutorials, we're starting to do a little bit of writing. We're starting to understand what referencing is and things like that. Come week 3, so sorry, pulling back for 1 second, of those 6, I'd only mark 2. Because they're not, this is a very big class. This is a principles class. You could have up to 500. So I would only mark 2 of those, and the students wouldn't know which ones that I marked. So what I do is I'd say, okay, they're starting in week 3. In the back of my mind, I knew that I wasn't going to mark week 3. Okay, first time, but the students didn't know that. So they would submit their week 3. And then in the tutorial, I said, all right, everybody, I set them up with a task to do for the day. It could have been a marketing scavenger hunt, something that would keep them busy and at the same time learning some of the material. And so what I would do is I would pull the student up for 60 seconds at a time and give them feedback on their assessment that they brought in, okay? So what did I do? What kind of feedback did I give, okay? I could talk about anything like structural issues, language misuse, redundant phrases, one sentence being a paragraph, no key arguments, or they didn't make their point, missing theory, grammatical errors, referencing. And 60 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're sitting there looking at a short answer question, being, educators as we are, we can really quickly point out what is done really, really well and what's done not so well. What was really good about this is at the end of this 60 seconds, I would give a hypothetical mark. I'd say, listen, I'm not marking this one, so you're off the hook. And they loved that. But I would say, all right, hypothetically, you would get a pass. If you're looking for something higher, you would need to do what I just told you. Or hypothetically, you most likely would not get a pass on this. Or this is excellent. You most likely will get a distinction or a high distinction on this. So in one way, we're creating, this, what Praneet was talking about earlier, and I wrote it down because he said, I can do this. Okay, I loved that, Praneet. So what we were trying to get from the students is, even if they didn't do well, okay, or they did do well, it doesn't matter. Either way, they walked away from your desk during that class after that 60 seconds saying, you know what, I can do this, okay? So we did it over 2 sessions over a year. So Ben, I'm just going to leave it over to you, Ben, if that's okay, and maybe Praneet, you can pin him so that we can see him, and he's going to talk about the results of our study.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet you all. So I think, as Mercedes said, one of the selling points of using this approach was the time that we had to take to develop this research. So it wasn't just kind of like one-off data collection type thing. Like we saw the results, and as Mercedes said, it's quite common for for all educators, all of us, to give feedback to the students and their marks. But I can basically cite a few researchers that have said it is quite disappointing that all the students care about is their marks, and they wouldn't look at the feedback, they wouldn't look at what you said that could improve their work for the future. All they would be looking at is a mark that they received. And actually, it's kind of like was inspired by a conceptual paper that we read. So as Mercedes explains, the mark was, the marking and everything was done the first session, but the second session, the assessments, as Mercedes explains, changed. And then we basically compared to 2 groups. It was a simple, independent t-test we did to, separate groups. As you can see the results for assessment task 2, for the first session was basically 61.6, which is almost kind of like is passed toward credit, but it was quite close to distinction for the same assessment that was done the next session, providing the feedback. And if Mercedes goes to the next slide, thank you. So the same kind of thing happened. The results were significantly different for the final exam, which we took the same approach. And as you can see, the mean was, almost the average score mark, was around 54. But again, it was credit for the final exam, which I guess shows a substantial impact this has to, by giving feedback early on to the students. So we'll pass it over to you, Mercedes. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, so basically there are some limitations to this approach because, again, what we did, this was in 2019, pre the world going completely different. So being completely pre-COVID, this was completely done face-to-face, okay? So there was no online, there was no dual delivery whatsoever. And now, as most of us have done, we have changed from going to in-person only till now online and dual delivery. you know, do I think it can't be done with dual delivery? Absolutely not. But I do think now that we will have to make some changes, because doing 60-second feedback in an online or dual delivery mode is a little bit different. And what I would propose is to have a drop-in session. The difference between drop-in sessions and doing it during a tutorial is the attendance is almost forced. Okay. Most, you know, they know that you're taking their attendance, so they tend to show up more. And the problem I would have with drop-in sessions is you wouldn't have those students who probably really need to come to you. So I'm still developing how that's going to look. I have this class in coming up next trimester that I'm going to try this with again in a dual delivery mode, and I'm going to try to work out some of the kinks and see how that works. So that's what we've had. Thank you very much. And yeah, I'm happy to take some questions too. Thanks, Ben, for helping out too.
Yeah, there's been some questions. Thank you very much, first of all, Mercedes and Ben. That was really, really good and insightful and encouraging as well. So thank you very much. What we might do actually, Mercedes and Ben, is there was some stuff coming in the chat. If you could sort of have a look at the chat and sort of try and respond there, we'll try and move on to Lisa and Sharon, and then we'll probably come back in the end if it's all right. But once again, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, guys.
Now, is Sharon and Lisa ready? Yep.
All right, I just needed to unmute us before we began. We got a bit of an idea.
Yeah, and if you're comfortable, you're welcome to turn on your videos as well.
We thought we'd do that, but we're also sitting together but sort of separate, so it's going to make it a little bit harder to do.
That's fine, whatever works, go for it. Yep.
All right, so we will try and move through this. Our system is not working the best today, so we're just going to do the best we can. There we go. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Lisa Duffy and I'm the Coordinator for Academic Writing in ECU's Uni Prep course, and I'm co-presenting today with Sharon, so you can see our faces here. I'm going to hand over to Sharon, who's going to get started.
Hi there. So the Uni Prep here at ECU is a 13-week, one-semester course requiring the completion of 4 units. And we have 3 core units: learning skills, academic writing and essential mathematics. And then students choose from 2 electives, either humanities or science. The units, which are colour-coded in blue, represents that we have an exam proportion of our assessment criteria. And we offer this course online, on campus, as most of the studies. And we have 3 campuses here in WA at Bunbury, Mount Lawley and Joondalup. Our cohort is pretty large. We have 1,200 students enrolled per semester. And we do have exams. And this is mainly because we want to prepare our students to what to expect in their undergraduate courses here at ECU, because a lot of our units, and especially in the sciences, maths and engineering, still have exams in their first year. And also we want to ensure a genuine attempt by the student. So this time last year, COVID hit, and we had to consider the following. We had to decide whether we were going to drop our exams or continue with an online platform. And if we were to continue, what platforms should we be using? And also how our students will cope with this change to these online exams, and how we will prepare our students for this change in this very timely manner. We also had to consider the equity and support for students who didn't have electrical equipment and digital technologies, computers, and also those with learning assessment plans, our labs. And also to ensure that the general attempt was by the enrolled student if sitting an online exam. So with all of this, we had a 2-week period to decide what we were going to do. And at the same time, we were redesigning our LMS system to support our students in the online environment, create resources to support the students and staff as well, moving to the online learning and teaching, and also provide training for all the new platforms we were going to use. So we chose Cadmus. And why did we choose Cadmus? Well, we decided that even with our numbers were just too large to manage with our COVID-19 restrictions here in WA. ECU had licenses and it was a known platform, but we had not used it ourselves in UniPrep. We were given just-in-time support from our Centre of Learning and Teaching department and also Cadmus themselves. And us as unit coordinators thought we knew enough to get started, and we had limited time to research an alternative. So it was correctly worked out though that Cadmus was not going to be suitable for our essential mathematics course.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we manage some of the barriers and concerns with moving to an online exam platform, not particularly for Cadmus, but just in general, moving to the online platform for our exams. One of the issues, which was Cadmus based, was that there was a general lack of familiarity with using Cadmus for both staff and students, particularly in UniPrep. We do have large numbers which have inevitably caused problems for us across a range of different systems, especially when those numbers of students are sitting at approximately the same time. We also, as mentioned, needed to cater to our equity students, and this is with reference to having access to digital technologies, but also the learning and assessment plans. We needed to manage the on-the-day IT issues, and again, just making sure that the student was making a genuine attempt at their exam. So we took some solutions-based approaches. To address the lack of familiarity, we had multiple pre-exam meetings with Cadmus and CLT in Teams. Unit coordinators spent significant time redesigning the exams to be usable online, training staff and developing support resources and instructions for both staff and students. With respect to large numbers, we had regular check-ins and support from Cadmus to be able to problem solve issues that was related to or were related to student volume. For our equity students, those students without digital technologies were given access to our e-labs, our libraries, and also computer loans to some students who had absolutely no access at all. We also decided to open up our exam for a 24-hour period, and this extended to account for access to digital technologies and labs. So if we're open for a longer period, if we have 2 students in the same house sharing a computer, we can manage that situation, and it also supported our students on learning and assessment plans. IT concerns, the university UniPrep coordinators were having at the shoulder virtual support to troubleshoot IT issues over the test availability period. So this included receiving phone calls on a Saturday morning when a student decided to start their exam, for example. Okay, in terms of determining a genuine attempt, for all examinable units, students were required to submit a prescribed exam preparation document a week prior to their exam with their photo ID, and this submission was provided a low-weighted grade. This attempted to provide somewhat of an authentic exam experience for the students, because we are trying to give them exposure to what they will expect when they're in their undergraduate. It also gave the impression of monitoring, and it was an opportunity for students to experience accessing and working within the Cadmus workspace. Plus, for the unit coordinators, it provided an opportunity for us to test the water with our large numbers and iron out any issues before the actual exams, because the students were accessing and working within those systems.
So what did we learn? So there was definitely some advantages to the students. They liked the fact that the Cadmus assessment was open for 24 hours. It gave them far more flexibility to complete their exams, especially for our FIFO workers, shift workers, parents and carers. Those who were scared of exams or feared exams, this was reduced. Often they would not actually take the exam because they were passing already, or they deferred due to panic. The task was more authentic to work-based practices, having all the resources on hand or embedded in the Cadmus system itself. And we found that students used a better exam preparation practices to prepare. And we found that students were actually prepared for the exams themselves. The student satisfaction experience was recorded, and this shows a snapshot of semester 1 2020, where students were asked to rate their experience after they submitted their submission. And you can see in academic writing, which was the first assessment, 252 students responded and said that 88% scored good to excellent with their experience. The science the science assessment was run later in the week, and 80 students rated their experience and scored over 90% in the good to excellence. You can see that the excellence has increased here, but that's probably because it became more familiar with the platform and were happy to use it. Just to let you know that this also corresponded to semester 2 and summer school this year.
So we also had some advantages to our staff, including us as unit coordinators. We found that paperless exams were far less resource intensive after initial planning, I will say, because that was certainly resource intensive. And there was also a faster turnaround time. So we didn't have to wait for exam collections anymore. We didn't have to wait for our exams to come in from regional, interstate or international locations. Dissemination of exams to tutors was immediate. They were able to access and mark immediately rather than wait for us to distribute them. There was also less administration in terms of having to collaborate with other departments. So timetabling for rooms, for example, organising the printing of exams and those types of things were eliminated. We found that moderation was better managed through online exams, especially where staff were able to pop into other markers' papers just to gauge how they were managing their markings, so a bit of self-moderation. It was also easier for tutors because we were able to centralise the resources with the rubrics and other stuff that they were using to support them with the marking, which is a little bit harder when they're coming up on campus. For science and academic writing, we were able to maintain the rigour. However, we found that for mathematics, an online exam wasn't suitable. The 24-hour availability period that was designed to support students reduced no-shows and deferred exam requests, so consequently reduced our administrative load. And we also found that there were more options through Cadmus in an online exam to include colour and images that were able to assist students to make stronger connections to the content and allowed us to use application questions. There were key unintended positive learning outcomes, one in particular that stood out to us through this process, and that was actually improving our students' exam preparation skills. So each examinable unit intentionally included a preparation task, and this attracted a low weighted grade towards their exam. And it was designed to help students familiarise with the Cadmus workspace. So students were taught how to prepare for the exam, which is normal practice, but this time they were actually getting a mark for that preparation that they submitted. So preparation now had a grade value for them. And this task was initially intended to predict and troubleshoot issues, orient the students to the platform and ensure genuine attempts by the enrolled students. What we learned from the process, though, is that this particular task encouraged stronger participation by students in preparing for their exams. So because they were given a low weighted grade and it was part of that exam process, they were preparing correctly for their exams using the strategies that we taught them rather than a choose their own adventure approach to exam preparation. In some units, this included the submission of handwritten notes, which actually enhanced their encoding and recall in their actual exam. And because the tasks were due in stages, it forced more students to use a distributed exam practice for their preparation rather than mass practice that we will often see when students are preparing for exams. So we just wanted to share our little experience that we had with managing COVID and just our reflection on what we learned in terms of enabling our students to prepare for their exams. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, both Sharon and Lisa. We might jump straight into Lisa's presentation if it's all right. But if you do have any questions, etc., please put it in the chat, and the presenters will be addressing that as we go along. So, are you ready to do that, Lisa?
I'm going to have a crack. So I'm going to try and do the I don't think that's working.
If you want
for you
to share your
but
slides.
that's okay. Look, I don't mind.
Okay.
I'm just, okay, when I move through, it's not recording. So I'm just going to stick to this screen and just go a little bit old school, if you're all happy with that.
Whatever works for you, Lisa, it's fine.
Okay, all of it works for me. Okay, so thank you. You get to listen to me again. I'm very sorry about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about a peer review process that I conduct in the academic writing unit for ECU's UniPrep course. This particular unit, students, it's probably one of the units that students struggle with a little bit because of the nature of the writing that's involved and the critical thinking. The reason I introduced this peer review task was actually to support students' feedback literacy. And so one of our core functions in enabling is to build our students' literacy skills. And this can be their university culture, their understanding of systems, numeracy, digital literacy, but sometimes we forget about feedback literacy in that process. This isn't intended to address any issues to support the problems that occur with feedback, just an example of practice in addressing feedback literacy. So I want to talk to the state of feedback firstly and quickly. So feedback is a process that supports learners to make sense of information and uses this information to enhance their performance and learning approaches. Hattie's quote is quite well known, and that is that feedback is one of the most powerful single influences of student achievement. However, it's also one of the least appreciated aspects of a course from a student perspective and often attracts some of the lowest student satisfaction rates in Australia. So to enhance feedback and feedback processes, students need to develop their feedback literacy and they need opportunities to be able to use this feedback. So if we talk about a little bit what feedback literacy is, it's more than simply reading, interpreting and using feedback. It's about having the knowledge, capacity and disposition to make sense of information and to use that to enhance performance and improve approaches to learning. And we can think of this in two key areas. Their knowledge, so understanding what feedback is and how to effectively manage that feedback, and their capacity and disposition. So being able to productively use feedback and appreciate feedback information sources and processes. And a key barrier to effective feedback is the lack of feedback literacy that exists for students. So why a peer review? I applied a peer review particularly because it uses a social constructivist perspective. So to benefit from feedback, students need opportunities to construct their own meaning and sense making from the information they're receiving. They need to be able to analyse feedback that they give and receive. And they also need opportunities to discuss it with others and make connections to their prior knowledge. The reciprocal process of peer review enabled the evaluation and being able to produce feedback to peers on their work and receive feedback from their work. So for academic writing, which is the unit I'm referring to, the students are expected to do an essay plan, which is a formative assessment, and this assessment feeds forward to their final essay. And what we do is we ask students to conduct a peer review of their essay plan, and they get 2% marks for participating in that process. So they submit a plan through Turnitin. They need to print a copy of their Turnitin similarity report and bring that to class when on campus. They work in pairs to independently, firstly, provide written feedback on 2 of their peers' papers, and they use a prescribed marking tool to do that. Then they work collaboratively with their partner to discuss the feedback that they've provided on each paper, and then collectively feed that back to the author of the original paper. And there is no de-identification that occurs. All the names of the reviewers and authors are transparent, as they would be if you are in the workplace and your employer is providing feedback to you. It's a little bit different online because the collaborative process is a little bit difficult to apply. We use peer mark on Turnitin, but to compensate for the collaboration, we do a number of tasks where the students can provide feedback in a collaborative manner. One of those is getting them to share some of their research articles, and then they rate and comment on the level of the article or the quality of the article that the student has provided, and they give them feedback on that. So we do these little activities to build that collaborative process as we're working through the unit. So we prepare our students for the peer review by firstly making sure they're engaged with all supporting resources from the first week. This is the rubric. We have a worked example for students. They have pre-submission checklists and more. These resources are referred to every week, and they're embedded in the activities that students are required to engage with. Particularly the exemplar that we use. We refer to it every time we do an activity. The peer review activities themselves are embedded into learning tasks to support students in being able to provide constructive, actionable feedback, and students practice reviewing examples of work leading up to the peer review event. In terms of feedback literacy, this is about building their capacity to make judgments and appreciate the feedback information sources and processes. So student reflections are conducted on the peer review and the peer review process. At the end of the semester, we ask students to conduct a reflection. There is no grade attributed to this. This is just simply an activity. We have 3 stages because we're trying to account for students' capacity to complete the task and their learning preferences as well. So we ask students to think of a word to sum up their peer experience, to develop or find a logo that they feel is representative of their experience, and also write a brief reflection. Most students do the first 2, not necessarily the last. On campus, this is presented in a pop-up presentation, and on discussion board, they submit this online. So how are our students developing their feedback literacy? I'm just going to give you some examples of the reflections from the unit and let you decide. So this particular student in the first example, I've highlighted some areas in bold that link back to feedback literacy. So the students saying that they saw problems in their own work, they were able to identify what they needed to work on, but more importantly, the importance of understanding the question and what's being asked of them. They talked about seeing things from a different angle, so building a wider perspective and to provide someone else the opportunity to read their work, they can see errors that they haven't been able to notice themselves. This slide here gives an example of a couple of posters or logos that have been developed by students. So the first one, the student talked to their knowledge growth with the owl, the fact that it was a collaborative process that required critical thinking, and they had to be very clear in the errors that they were searching for, the resources that they needed to support them in the process. This student with their poster, the blue poster, talked about how they were able to see their mistakes, help others with their mistakes, and use the rubrics to identify how to actually present the essay plan more accurately and clearly. The other reflections that I have, students have talked to being able to have a slight idea of what the tutors are looking for, which was a little bit of a compliment, I guess. But we also had the continued reflection from the same student who talked about being able to compare their essays with their peers, which showed them what their tutors were looking for when they marked their essay, and it forced them to interrogate the literature that was provided to them. So they're engaging with the feedback information sources to help them with their essay. We had another one here that talked about them being able to go back and reflect on that process after going through the review process themselves in this example. And I particularly like this one, which was primarily a logo, but the student talked about the collaborative nature linking to the social constructivist perspective in being able to progress towards the next stage of their assignments by working collaboratively with their peers to work through their feedback. So I thought that was quite a nice one that the student put forward. A few more images represented by the students' logos, talking to the collaborative nature of the process, their growth and development through the brain tree that you can see in the image there, And also they're one where the students found their newfound knowledge to inform their future practice for the assessments that are coming up. So again, I will ask, are our students developing feedback literacy? And I think this particular poster and these comments sum it up. The student has said that they investigated what was being asked of them. It increased their clarity and their wider perspectives. So they're demonstrating a better appreciation of feedback information and processes, a better understanding of assessment expectations, but they're also able to reflect on their own work after exposure to wider perspectives, which I think was captured by this particular student. Thank you. It's enough of me now.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Lisa. That was wonderful. I enjoyed that, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. As I said, I'll continue with the presentations. Just a word, it seems like we might be running a little bit late, but I would encourage anyone who can stay on for another 5 or 7 minutes, please do. But if you're unable to do that, if you have to leave, just a note that we will be sharing the recordings via the NAEEA website and other social media points as well. So let me just share my screen here. Okay, so once again, thanks for the 4 presenters from different universities. That it was really wonderful to see how some of these ideas, if you like, conceptual ideas, are often applied at the coalface, for example. Assessments, particularly in enabling and pathway programs, for example, do tend to be a little bit more flexible. They do tend to demonstrate a lot more empathy, compassion, and success, and strive towards success, for example. But it can certainly be applied in other settings as well, and it should be applied in other settings. How do we go about applying it to other settings? I think it's important to start with empathy, for example, really understand where your students are coming from, to try and understand their positions and how they will be engaging with your assessments, particularly given the diversity of students that we are getting in higher education these days. Do not use assessments as gatekeepers. Assessments are designed, should be designed to engage students in the learning that needs to occur, not as a gatekeeping instrument. And I go back to this particular equation, if you like. For example, yes, we've got knowledge and skills, but attitude plays a very, very important role in sort of defining student success. Some of the reasons why many people don't innovate assessments is because, well, first of all, we tend to focus too much on equality. We try and give the same experience to every single student. And I try and use this picture quite often as I can. And if you just have a look at that picture, for example, not all students are the same. Not all students experience the learning in the same way, and they certainly do not engage with the assessments in the same way. And to get students to engage in the same sort of way is actually ignoring the equity issues that exist. This is what the other attitude that exists is, this is the way we've always done things. Examinations is a case in point. And I've come across colleagues, fortunately not that many of them now, who are proud to have the hardest subject at university. And people are really proud to say that most of my students don't fail, for example. I think, you know. That takes us to the end of today's presentations. As I said, we will have a little bit of time for questions, but before I open it up, once again, a reminder that this particular presentation was brought by the NAEEA Enabling Assessment Special Interest Group. We're a very small group. If you do want to join, send myself, praneet.anand@qut.edu, or my co-facilitator, James Valentine at cdu.edu.au, an email, and we'll put you on the email list. But also you can Google NAEEA and go to the special interest group pages. Now, let me just stop my share. Okay, so as I said, we do I think we are able to hang around for another few more minutes, 5 minutes or something like that. If anybody does have any questions, you can turn on your microphone if you want to, and ask away, and the presenters will be able to answer your questions. I know the chat was running it was pretty busy for a little while, which is really, really good. So I think quite a lot of concerns have possibly been answered. And yep, does anybody have any questions? Thank you, Angela. Yep. Thanks, Natasha. Yep. Yep. Okay, well, it's just basically just thanks for all. Yep, excellent. Okay, does any of the presenters have any last thing, anything else to add before we wrap it up?
Thanks for having us, Praneet.
I might just add that there was a lot of talk about resubmissions in the chat and people sharing different ideas, and maybe this is something we can continue on the blog as well, continue sharing our ideas around that if that's of particular interest to people.
Yeah. Just the blog that James has mentioned that we have our special interest group maintains a blog. It's not very active, but there's some stuff in there. So we'll probably share that through when we share the recordings and things like that through our social media pages, as well as the NAEEA website as well. Thanks, James.
Hi, will the blog be something? Oh, it's Kate here. Hi. Will the blog be something that we can all post onto?
Yeah, that's the idea, Kate. Yes, it should be. I still have to go back and tweak a few little things because I haven't used it myself for a little while. It's just been parked on the side for a while, but that would be the idea. Yes. Yep. Okay. Looks like that probably is the cue to wrap things up, I think. Well, once again, I'd like to thank all the presenters, James, Mercedes, Ben, Lisa, and Sharon, for sharing your initiatives with us, and also I'd like to thank everyone else for taking your time out and joining us on this Friday afternoon. I know we actually had about just under 80 people registered, and we had about 38 people who turned up, but this always happens whenever you have a free event. A lot of people register and we don't always get everyone who registered, but things turn up. But in any case, we will be sharing the recording via the NAEEA website and the social media pages. So on that note, I'll stop the recording.